Welcome to the Finance Forum. I'm Abdu-Raof Hanslo. This week, we look at one of the more difficult topics in financial planning, and that being medical and healthcare insurance, or as we commonly know it, medical aid and medical cover. This is one of those topics that I think the financial advisors don't really like speaking about, but at the end of the day, this is a vital part of our financial plan going forward. I'm joined in studio by Etienne Wilsnach of Alchemy Financial Services once again, and we're still busy with the series on financial planning. Good day to you, Etienne.
Hi, good day to you, Abdu-Raof.
It's always a pleasure having you with me in studio.
It's my pleasure. Again.
Now, as my introduction said, we're looking at that one antichrist product that financial advisors don't like advising on, or let me rephrase that they're not keen to enter, but have to basically cover in the financial planning spectrum. Why is this the dreaded product for financial advisors, Etienne?
So over the years, the product's become quite complicated, and it's become more of a specialist item. So you'd often find that if you had a financial advisor, he's not going to have the conversation with you unless he specializes in that field. So in my space within Alchemy, we contracted out to a specialist. So if I'm going to talk to you about investments, if I'm going to talk about your risk portfolio, that's fine because that's my field of expertise. Medical aid is not specifically. So we contract it out and we'll get a partner in. And why do we do that? Is to make sure that you're getting appropriate advice. Like I say, even if you look at your GP, if you're not, you go see somebody for your knee, you don't see your GP, you go see a specialist, and he will focus on that part. We are trying to achieve the same. Medical aid has changed so much since 1999, since the introduction of the new generation products, that it's impossible to stay ahead of that game. So you'd find now that you have dedicated medical aid companies or specialists that will come and see you separate to your financial advisor.
Now, Etienne, I remember the early days of medical aid, being a member of medical aid because my dad had medical aid for the family. And I remember specifically how those medical aids operated and the benefits that we had out of that medical aid. So if I needed a dentist, there was a specific cover for a dentist. If I remember a specialist or whatever, there was always cover for those various different options. That's changed. That whole spectrum has changed over time. And I think it's due to one company that's basically taken it on and changed the whole concept of medical aid. Etienne, there's a question basically that we have to ask, and I'll read it to you.
Okay.
Jerry, the problem is legacy, it said, and the way people treated their membership that caused the problem. What is meant by this? What is meant by the legacy, and what is meant by the membership that caused the problems?
I'm going to actually thank you for that question, because in the last 24 years, I've realized that's the problem, that people had a way of doing things. As much as our country had changed, medical aid's changed. So I remember the old days when I started working, when I was in government medical aid, I was in city council medical aids, where you could, it was you swiped your card. That was the general emotion. I just gave in my card and everything was paid for. What's not been communicated to the consumer is that if we stayed on that path as an economy, as a country, we would have bankrupted healthcare as we knew it. We couldn't have continued in that fashion. What we need to understand is that pre-apartheid, there was a very few people that had exposure to medical aid. So, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big part of our economy.
Yeah.
So sub-94, post-94, we all have access to medical aid. The problem now is that pie has just gotten so much more, it's gotten bigger, but there's so many more of us eating from the same pie.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have lasted. So if anything, we need to thank that company for coming in, and a lot of people don't understand that. They see it as the evil, and they came and changed everything. No, they came and saved the industry, the medical aid industry as we knew it. If they did not introduce those changes in 1999, 2000, the medical aid industry in South Africa could have bankrupted. and we would have had a bigger problem. So all they've done was realigned it to ensure that we've got medical aid for the future. Okay, and we need to look at that analytically to understand it.
Etienne, now we were chatting before the break, in fact before the program, and the one conversation we had was we want the best for our kids. And in saying that, whenever we're looking at the future for our children, and I take it from myself, my focus is always, Dad, what should I study? My first answer to that is always medicine. Become a doctor.
Yeah.
Why? Because that's the most profitable, in my opinion, one of the most profitable industries to enter and professions to enter. And that brings me to my next question. I mean, we all have good intentions for our kids, and looking at it from a different perspective. Healthcare, private healthcare in South Africa has become exceptionally expensive. Hence, doctors being one of the more affluent professions today.
Yeah.
For a person that can't afford to have medical aid or can't afford to pay for private healthcare, what are the options available to that person?
This is the scary part. Your option is state healthcare, and I think people need to understand this question, that if you look at all of the options available, you've got certain companies now that could offer you up to 16 different product ranges within the company. Okay, so if you cannot find an affordable solution within that, your option is a state institution. And I think therein lies the problem. So what you need to look at is geographically, where are you living, and is the state institution in your area sufficient? Is it of a quality that's acceptable? Then my advice to you, don't be alarmed at it. I was in Vredendal up the west coast a few weeks ago, and the comment there is that the state institution is of a very high quality, and you're getting, so if I was living in Sultana or Vredendal, I wouldn't be too concerned. If I couldn't afford medical aid, I wouldn't be too concerned. But now they're saying, hang on, the old Uster Hospital, if that is what I have access to, do I want to expose my kids to that level of healthcare? And if the answer is no, I don't, then find an affordable healthcare solution within what's available to you and invest in it.
Now, Etienne, when looking at the community that attends hospitals, that needs healthcare, the prevalent amongst us is the retired, the mothers, the fathers, the grandfathers, the grandmothers, that have now reached the age where they're no longer working or cannot work anymore, and they specifically require that healthcare at that age. So it's glasses and tablets at that age.
Brille and pille.
Yeah. Not excluding the false teeth as well. So,
okay.
At that age, basically, that's the age that you require healthcare, and in most cases, they might be getting slightly inadequate healthcare from the public health sector. Now, a person that's been working their entire lives and have contributed towards pension funds and retirement funds, and is now receiving a stable retirement income from a pension fund at retirement. It's said that 40% of the income they're receiving currently is contributed towards medical aid expenses. How well, the question's twofold. How can they afford this, number one? And number two, are there better options available to pensioners who are receiving pension funds? Or should this just be re-looked at?
The scary answer to that is, if you didn't plan early on in your life, you have a problem. So the stat, I agree with you that presently 40% of most pensioners' income is spent on healthcare. So if you're in your 20s, in your 30s, you have a hospital plan. If I end up in hospital, but I don't need day-to-day healthcare. If you are 68 years old, high blood pressure, you're diabetic, you've got chronic conditions, that's when it becomes problematic. So if you didn't make plans early on in your life, so that a portion of my pension fund income is going to be dedicated, my membership of employees going to be retained into my into my pension and my retirement era, you are going to have a problem. There aren't any solutions. So if somebody's in a SASSA pension fund of 7,800 Rand a month, and I'm having a conversation of medical aid contribution of 1,200, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So again, there's two solutions. Being a community person myself, is for the kids to step up and to say, and this is a personal tip, I've applied it in my own life. You've got to ask yourself, if mom and dad ends up in hospital and we have a bill of 500,000 Rand, can we afford it? If the alternative as a state institution is not an option, why don't we discuss it as kids amongst ourselves and say, let's go and look at an affordable healthcare plan for mom or dad, and as kids, let us contribute 200 or 300 Rand each. Trust me, guys, when that event does happen and you want the best for your mom or the best for your dad, and you get an oncology bill of 1 million Rand 12 months later, that 300 Rand is going to seem nothing. It's going to be deemed as an investment in the quality of life of your mom and your dad. So if mom and dad cannot afford it, as kids, have the conversation and say, how can we come up with a solution? Because if it happens, we are going to be faced with two realities. Mom or dad's going to end up in Tygerberg or Grootesker, or we can give them health care at a private institution because we've placed them on a medical aid that we are contributing to.
I think this is also a lesson for us, basically looking at our parents and our grandparents and seeing the difficulties that they're currently going through, or maybe going through at the moment on their SASSA pensions, and realizing that if we don't make that calculated choice today to save for our retirement adequately, that we too could be sitting in the same mess going forward in the future. Now, Etienne, you mentioned something earlier, and that was a hospital plan. Yeah. So when looking at medical cover and medical aid or medical insurance, or however we want to name it, what's the difference between a hospital plan and your comprehensive medical aid cover? And is this just an affordability issue that one chooses one or the other, or is it set out for a specific reason that way?
That's actually a brilliant question. Set out specifically for, it's twofold. It can be for purely affordability, but also personal need, life stage. So if I'm a 24-year-old young guy, started working 2 years ago, I don't have any dependents, I'm not at the doctors very often, but I cycle or I'm active, and I say, if I end up in hospital, I'd like private healthcare without the exposure of potential cost. I would choose a hospital plan, because I'm not seeing, and if I occasionally go and see the doctor for a cold, or I don't mind paying the 300 Rand for the visit, then I would choose a hospital plan. If I am a dad, mom, 2 kids, and mom's pregnant, okay, kiddies, regular visits to hospital, that's another scenario. I would then look at something that's slightly more comprehensive. Now, this is the part where people lose the plot. They then assume if you say comprehensive, it's like the old medical aid. Yeah. Those are generally very expensive. So your normal cash plan or your out-of-hospital option plan gives you the combination of the in-hospital cover, like the 24-year-old, with a dose of out-of-hospital funding that's available to you from month 1. Yeah. So if you had a choice and that you were investing an additional 500 Rand into your fund, they would really advance you then 6,000 Rand for the year annually that you could now use for the doc. So it's an advance of really your own funding, and that's where people get lost. They think that is just funds no, it's your own funds. Yeah. The institution, the company is only advancing it for you. You can now use it as you need to. And often, in my case, mom, dad, 3 kids, by August or July of each year, it's exhausted. Yeah. And then you start funding it anyway. But Jenny takes us through the winter season, the sniffly season, and we use it up. But with kids, you never know. Okay, but it does help. It just makes that knock a bit easier. And that's generally how you would choose it. Do I take the in-hospital plan, only gives me hospitalization, or do I take the one with hospitalization with a combination of funding for my day-to-day visits?
Now Etienne, to throw a spanner in the works, ultimately, we all have access to television, and on television nowadays we see a lot of adverts for medical insurance. And whereby it's mentioned that they will pay up huge amounts of cash for stays in hospital. Now, we've spoken about hospital plans and we've spoken about comprehensive medical aids. Where does medical insurance fit into this whole scenario?
Okay, so medical insurance, a bit of a technical response, but in South Africa there's two levels of insurance. One's called long-term, and one called short-term. So your long-term is your personal covers, your risk, your disability. The term short-term applies to, your material objects, your car, your house, your watch, your bike. So the medical insurance products is generally underwritten in that space. Okay, so they're very restricted. Often they're very limited. There's a lot of fine print. Often the procedures are limited as well. So there'd be listed procedures that's covered, and that's what people need to understand. The reason why it's cheaper, it's because there's limited cover to it. The biggest downfall, people often do not know that it will only cover you from day 3, day 5, day 7, not from day 1 of the event. The challenge for us is that most often 80% of our visits to the doctor is a 24-hour visit. So if you ran a bill of 28,000 Rand on day 1 and you go home, that product's not going to cover you. You need to have stayed in hospital for a period of 3 days, and it will then cover you retrospectively from day 1. So you've got to make sure that that's going to cover your needs. And if you're in an event that's not going to have you in hospital for more than 3 or 5 days, depending on the contract, it won't cover you sufficiently.
Now, Etienne, basically what you're saying is that those products, there is a place for it, for long-term illnesses maybe, or so on. But for the short term, for coverage, ultimate coverage, a hospital plan or medical aid would basically be the better option out of the three.
That's often a top-up cover. It's more of it could be deemed. So I've got medical aid, but I want to make sure I'm self-employed, and I want to make sure, because those products also pay you, not the service provider. So sometimes people use it as an income protector. So I'm going to be covered, but I'm self-employed, and for the period that I'm at home, I want that 100,000 Rand worth of cover that will also allow me to fund my conditions at home. So I would deem it as a top-up plan, but I would never advise you to have that as your sole product that's going to protect you from A to Z. You might find yourself short.
Now, Etienne, another thing that springs to mind right now is that in the old days we had these medical aids that I would like to call traditional. That and why I call it traditional is because it's a rare occurrence that you find anything like that today, whereby you get your dentistry cover, your optical cover, your GP visits cover, and all that. Why in today's day and age do you not very often see medical aids doing that? They will give you one lump sum cover that covers your entire savings for the year. So if you use it up at the doctor, there's no optical benefits. If you use it up at the dentist, there's no doctor's benefits. Why has medical aids moved in that direction compared to the old structure of structuring everything for specific needs of the individual?
So I'm going to answer that twofold. The first part is that those products are often so expensive that if you really, very few of us can afford it. The other alternative is my company is paying for it, so I don't care. So I still say we're probably looking at 1 or 2% of our population. So in light of that fact, the average person cannot afford those products anymore. The problem was that those areas, dentistry and optical, is where most of the abuse took place over the years. The teardrop Ray-Bans, and you know what, I go and buy 300 rands worth of glasses, but it's invoiced for 3,000, and you know, the dentistry, the industry couldn't sustain that. Because that was the loophole, that was the gap, that was where abuse could take place. And it's just a responsible decision. You know, the industry had to look and say, we cannot afford to allow that anymore. We can't entertain it. And it's for that reason that they took it out of most of the offering. So make peace with that. If you're going to go to your dentist, if you're going to get glasses, you're going to pay for it.
Now, Etienne, when obviously looking to invest in a medical aid for myself and my family, or whatever, there's always, and one looks at the entire spectrum of companies offering medical aids. It's a daunting task to sit and go through every single portfolio of each and every company, and then still you would be uncertain of which one's the better one or the better option. How best does one choose a medical aid company that would offer the ideal coverage for you in your scenario?
So if your company is not offering it, that would be probably the easiest bit, because then the choice is made for you.
Sure.
But if you don't, my immediate advice is you first look at the claims experience of the company you would want to go with. Look at affordability and say, you know what, in terms of the range of products, where am I pegged, how much can I invest or pay for my product each month, and then select it. So it's based on affordability, the claims experience of the company, and look at the size of it. You know, don't go with an unknown institution, an unknown entity, and then 2 months from now, when you have your claim, that's when you realize, hang on, I paid less, but I'm not getting it. So, you know, there's probably about 3 or 4 big role players in the country at the moment. Find them. I'm not going to mention them by name, but find those 3 or 4, look at there, and then select it. And choose one of those options. Don't complicate it. And my biggest advice, do not get drawn into social media opinion of that company. You must remember that's one person that's had a bad claims experience, and he's going to spew his guts on social media. What he doesn't tell you, that for that one claim that didn't go well, there were possibly 25 million that did go, and we don't, as humans, talk about those. So don't look at social media as an option. Okay, there's often just negative opinion, but it's not valid. There's always a story to it. So be analytical about it. Look at cost, look at affordability, and look at the claims experience of the company that you're choosing to protect you and your kids.
Now, Etienne, you know, from the Finance Forum side, we're always propagating fit and proper advice. And just from what you've just said there, I mean, it sounds like an extremely daunting task to go and choose your own medical aid. In closing, we always advise our clients to seek professional financial advice from a registered and accredited financial advisor or financial planner as yourself. What advice, in closing, do you have for our consumer?
Okay. So in an ideal world, if you can get a medical aid specialist to advise you in that field, okay, that's ideal, because we, as I said at the start of this conversation, we cannot do everything. So firstly, try and get somebody that's a specialist, and then always make sure that they are linked to one of the companies that's well known, okay, and then base it on affordability. But do not avoid the conversation. Do not, because often it's when you end up at the trauma unit at critical care, I should have the conversation with your wife. Find a registered financial advisor that focuses specifically in the medical aid field, not a generalist, and ask him for guidance.
You've been watching the Finance Forum with myself, Abdu-Raof Hanslo, and we've been speaking medical aid and medical cover. From my learned guest's presence here and from what he said, I hope that you've learnt quite a bit, and learnt from our past experiences with our parents, our grandparents, aunties and uncles. A quick story before we end. Not too long ago, I had the privilege of taking a family member for his regular checkup to one of the state hospitals. I was horrified to find, to drop him off firstly in the morning at 7 a.m. for his appointment, and I was horrified to find out that only at 7 o'clock, or at least 4 o'clock the afternoon, he was done with that appointment. Our elderly needs taken care of, and it's our responsibility to basically take care of ourselves and our elderly. So I hope you've learned from this, and I hope that changes will be made in your lifestyle going forward to cover us for these eventualities. Until next time, stay focused to your finances.